This is solidarity. Around 2,000 people.
Well, what is solidarity, and how is it possible that women in these days are still fighting for their own rights or equality for men as women in the past, thousands of years ago? According to the Merriam-Webster's dictionary, the definition of solidarity is the unity as a group of class that produces or is based on community of interests, objectives, and standards. Women these days still fight for their own rights and equality. And how could the Peniliopad, in contrast to the Odyssey, be a book that talks about women's equality and justice and how women are equal to men? Yes, we know that women are equal to men. But how could Margaret Atwood's book, The Peniliopad, change our views and change the views of old novels that we are supposed to read in our high school education, and how women are supposed to be treated with justice and equality to men? How could this book, The Peniliopad, change the view of students in modern day time? As we said, in modern day time, in this high school literature and language curriculums, classics are often considered to be essential towards the student's linguistic and literary development. Many of the quintessential classics portray a world of injustice and discrimination and convey messages that are timelessly relevant to the real world. This is the case with Margaret Atwood's The Peniliopad. Yet it also regains a world of justice and gender equality through shedding light on lesser characters and not just the multifaceted characters. Since the very beginning of literature and classics, themes and morals have always revolved around the narratives of male, privileged characters rather than other foiling lesser characters who can also convey meaningful messages. These foiling lesser characters are often always women, and in Margaret Atwood's The Peniliopad, the perspective of Penelope and the 12 other maids enhance recurring themes from the Odyssey, but more importantly, convey novel ideas and messages that challenge a particular fabric woven into the society. We see how in The Peniliopad, Margaret Atwood shines the characters into the light, and it shows us what Peniliopad was doing, and how when Odysseus killed these 12 maids in cold blood, she felt bad for waiting for him. She did not feel okay. We have to acknowledge this and how Margaret Atwood wrote this book, and how even though in Odysseus and the Odyssey, we see that Peniliopad is the perfect wife and the perfect person to live in that time, who waited for her husband all these years. And she doesn't really get a voice. She's ousted out and she's told to be quiet. While in this book by Margaret Atwood, we see a new version of the story, a version that is clearly shown at a different perspective, and a way that we could see who she truly is, and not just someone who is forced to be quiet. And in the Odyssey, we see how she is ousted out by the book itself. The Odyssey, she does not get that much time to talk and to truly express herself. While in this book, The Peniliopad, Penelope is truly shown as a character, and we see inside her head and what she's thinking and what she is feeling. We see the pain and suffering that she is going through, as maybe one of her friends has been in cold blood murdered, as they were not at fault for being raped, and instead of being treated well and maybe put in rehab, they were put to death. In this quote, we see how they were forced to be dirty girls, and how they were forced to use their bodies for the will of the men in the book. We see how in this book they were used for the noblemen that came to the palace or to the castle, and seen as an object to the men in the story. We see this in the play and how it progresses, as these women who did not want to have sex or affairs with these men came and they basically raped them. We see how this social injustice and gender injustice is constantly used throughout the play, and how just because they are servants and as they are women, they are treated unfairly and injustice towards the book. And even though they were raped, they were still hanged by Odysseus in the Peniliopad and in the Odyssey. We see in this quote how it really brings the characters to life, and it really brings Margaret Atwood's The Peniliopad and how it shows the world of the perspective of lesser foiling characters, like Penelope and the 12 Maids. They can be just as effective and impactful as the perspective of the main multifaceted characters. Their stories and messages are just as important, and often they are the puzzle piece that makes an experience complete. The difference between a story centered around a single theme and one that paints the complex world. The Odyssey by itself is really just an epic poem on the journey, struggles and triumphs of a great hero, but with perspectives and messages of foiling characters like Penelope, the 12 Maids, and Telemachus. It paints the details of gender inequality, injustice, and partitional values into the world of the Odyssey. We see how in this story the characters are introduced more and more and weaved into the play or this epic poem. We see how it brings and sheds the light of how they lived and how they died, and the regret that Penelope feels and her emotions as well. We see how the story is wrapped around Penelope and how the struggle within herself and the struggle with gender inequality brings the book to a new life. Yet in this book we see how this is carried over into modern day times. We see women still go on rallies as we saw in the beginning, and they fight for their own suffrage and they fight for their rights. We see how women in these days are still fighting for the same things that the women in the past fought for as well. But now we're louder and we sound more clearer. We see in the book how Penelope kept to herself and how she stayed quiet while still thinking. But in Margaret Atwood's book, we see how she was thinking, and even though we see her as a perfect wife that did not say anything or did not talk back to her husband, we still see how this character was opened up as a character that is more inspirational to suffrage movements and is not the perfect wife, but a woman who just wants to be treated equally. We see how in modern times women just want to be treated equally as well. Yet men oppress these rights and these thoughts. We see how women take to the streets and take up their flags, take up their banners, and we see them fight for what they believe in. And that is something that this book sheds to light how in modern day times women have a voice as well, and women could talk and are still oppressed in this current day and time, and this is something that is not right. We have to think about how these women have been oppressed for years and years, and how this book of an epic poem has shown us the truthness and the light of the oppression that they've fought against. We see that these 12 maids who were hanged show the voice that cannot be shown again, and they show people who are oppressed against today in society. We could see them as women who cannot talk, as these women are dead inside. But we see how the mind is something so much far greater. We see how women do have a voice, and that women are to be treated equally. And with this, I will leave you off with a video which I thought was very inspirational and touching.
Centuries old, but it's looked at with a 21st century gaze. And a lot hasn't changed. A lot has, but a lot hasn't. And I think it's good to re-examine our myths. And also, we know the Iliad, we know the Odyssey. It's about Odysseus. It's about men in history. And this is back to the old, 70s feminist theory about we need to see her story rather than just the his story. It's taken from the viewpoint of Penelope, the wife who stayed at home, the wife who waited, the woman who is held up as an example to all women, as if this is a good thing to do. And Penelope is saying, I'm not so sure. 12 maids were killed, when Odysseus came home, the ones that were sleeping with the suitors. And that's all it said about them. That was it. That was all. And you wonder, well, wait a minute. How did that happen? Why did that happen? What did Penelope think about that? Why were they killed? Why were they punished for being raped? Why were they blamed for the actions of someone else? Well, that's a question we ask every day in the courtrooms and all over the world. And I don't think our horror should be any less.